was like, I couldn't handle it. Like, I just can't handle the vegan propaganda and having these films, go out to the world and become pretty popular, right? You go around town and people are like, oh yeah, I'm vegan now. Like, I saw the film, it was so great. And it's just not a human diet. So I wanted to set the record straight, make the one big health film that is actually true and high quality and a great production. And so that sent me down this path. And it's been my full-time job for 6 years now.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Carnivore Revolution. I'm Serena. And today my guest is Brian Sanders. Brian is not 100% carnivore, but he eats a healthier diet than at least 95% of people. I would say more than that, and he eats primarily meat. Brian is the host of the top-rated podcast, Peak Human, an international speaker and filmmaker making the Food Lies documentary. He is also the co-founder of Sapien, a health education company. Brian, thank you so much for hanging out today.
Hey, Serena. Yeah, glad to be here.
And so I want to start with your story. I always like to start with people's story so that the audience knows what brought people to the point that they are in their life with their health journey and the foods that they eat.
I was a classic American family eating the standard American diet, but the healthy version of that diet. We followed the food pyramid. We did low fat products and whole grains and pasta and bread and avoided red meat and did that whole thing. And it was all good until it wasn't. And that's what happens to so many people, right? They keep going on this supposed healthy journey, and then they get sicker and more overweight each year. And so I lost both my parents to chronic disease when I was about 30. And that was the same time that I started getting the same symptoms of chronic disease and becoming sort of skinny fat. Even though I was athletic and always played sports and was always pretty thin, I was just skinny fat, and was just gaining all this fat in my belly and my neck and just feeling bad and getting on, just starting that road of getting on medications and having problems. And then I kind of woke up, right? I didn't want to have the same problems as my parents. I actually read the Primal Blueprint. If people know who Mark Sisson is, he's turning 70 in a few weeks and he's in incredible shape. He's the man. I read his book and my whole life changed. I made some simple changes. I cut out simple things, and I started eating more meat, and it was amazing. And then I kept going along my life, not thinking much of it until I saw some of these vegan films. And it was a turning point for me, was watching What the Health 6 years ago. And I remember that was the day I decided to make this film. It was like, I couldn't handle it. Like, I just can't handle the vegan propaganda and having these films, go out to the world and become pretty popular, right? You go around town and people are like, oh yeah, I'm vegan now. Like, I saw the film, it was so great. And and I know that it's not true. I see the aftermath now of all the vegans that ruin their health and, try to do it and still fail. And it's just not a human diet. So I wanted to set the record straight, make the one big health film that is actually true and high quality and a great production. And so that sent me down this path. And it's been my full-time job for 6 years now. I just decided to quit what I was doing. I was a mechanical engineer before. I was in tech. I was doing all these different careers and, had a good paycheck and decided to give it all up to go on this path, and started a podcast along the way. Peak Human, as you mentioned, started my company Nose to Tail, started grass-fed regenerative meat company, started Sapien, started the Sapien Center in Austin, where we live this lifestyle in person. We have sort of this social club where we just have a bunch of people living this lifestyle. And when people come into this center, people are amazed. They're like, why is everyone so radiant and healthy and good looking and strong? And it's just like, well, we just eat animal-based diets and we work out in the sun and we, have a community that is about it. And it's great. So my whole life is this now, and would love to talk about all this stuff.
You mentioned Mark Sisson. I actually already had that on my notes to mention that to you, because I saw your interview with Mark Sisson. And he is actually the one for me that made me question. I was like you, healthy standard American diet. When we had kids, I never bought baby food. I always made it. I would hand them a can of green beans with no salt added at a stoplight, when they were hungry in the back seat. I mean, I thought I was doing it right. And I saw Mark's and it was a long time ago, 18 years maybe, when I first started following Mark's Daily Apple. And I still have printouts from that. Like, it really made an impact on my life. But as humans, I did what humans do and just kind of reverted back to my healthy standard American diet for so many years with my kids. And I wish that I had stuck with the things that I learned from him all those years ago. But I wanted to talk for a minute about your research. You have gone all kinds of places. You've done all kinds of research. And I'm sure there are many things that have surprised you, but would you say is close to the number one thing that has surprised you that you have found out was, basically a lie when you're doing all this research?
Wow. Yeah, that's hard. Because, I had that strong foundation from Mark Sisson. The craziest thing is he had it all figured out so long ago, and he's not the first one to figure it out. He's kind of basing it on a lot of Weston A. Price research, which I love. Weston Price maybe was one of the first people to figure out 100 years ago and travel around the world and realize why all the chronic disease was happening in the modern societies that started using the processed foods. And the quick recap is he found all these untouched civilizations that didn't eat the processed foods, and they all had impeccable health and great teeth. And, they were just doing way better than everyone else. And they were eating organ meats and meat and fish and eggs and all kinds of stuff. And they weren't eating seed oils, added sugars, or refined grains. So, I mean, it's hard. It's crazy is that along the way, that's the consistent theme. Like, maybe it's the most surprising that he nailed it 100 years ago so well that for me, I've been in different dietary camps. I've had different views from paleo to low carb to keto to carnivore to my own diet I call Sapien, which isn't a diet. It's just this framework. But I mean, I've gone through all the different things and done so much research, interviewed hundreds of people, talked to the top doctors and scientists around the world, been to Africa. And it all comes back to the simplest message of avoiding these 3 processed ingredients, the seed oils, refined sugars, added grains. If you get rid of those 3 ingredients, well, you're getting rid of 80% of the grocery store. You're getting rid of 80% of what normal people eat. So it is actually kind of a big intervention for a lot of people. But for me, simple lifestyle now, and it works so well. So yeah, I guess I'm most surprised that that's all there is to it. But yeah, I mean, it was surprising too. I mean, I did go to Africa, spend time with hunter gatherers, and just to see them in action. And that was just so cool to see, and how healthy they were. It's like, to the farther away you got from the city and then the more natural people live, it was surprising to see what humans can be like, right? We asked them questions like, do you have back pain or knee pain? Or do you have trouble, the women, do you have trouble with your period? Or do you have trouble with pregnancies? And they're just like, no. Like, they just didn't have any of the modern conditions we have. It's just foreign to them to have all these little problems that we think is normal. So maybe that's the most surprising thing, or just revealing thing, is to see it in person, to see like what humans are supposed to live like. And it is, your body just works, right? It's like, yeah, at some point you die, but they're living well and strong and healthy until that day, it seemed like. And then as we got away from the people that live the most naturally, more into the city or more into these agricultural populations that didn't have enough meat, and they were just surviving on whatever plant foods they could grow and a lot of corn. They would get like cornmeal and then make this thing called ugali that they would live, basically calories to survive with just cornmeal paste and water. And they were doing poorly. They look like average Americans, not obese, but hunched over, bad knees, bad back, and they were living off of whole foods. I keep changing my story here, but maybe that was the most surprising, that I saw them. We got together, we called it the tribe of elders. And this woman, Mary, who helped organize a trip, she organized, spent months and months organizing this and found ways to get a whole bunch of these elders in this community together to do this sort of interview. We filmed with them and experienced with them. And we thought they were going to be super healthy and like tell us about all this stuff. but it ended up that they were an agricultural society. They weren't like the hunter-gatherer society, right? They were just living off of, like I said, whatever they could grow, all these different plant foods and grains. And so they didn't have packaged foods. They didn't have glyphosate. They didn't have all these things that people blame the problems on, right? They didn't have those. They certainly did not have those. There was no chance in the world they could afford McDonald's. They didn't have McDonald's. There was nowhere near there. There's one McDonald's and it's, by the airport, and it's 10 times the price of anything they'd ever buy. So they were just eating all of these kind of low quality grains and plant foods, and they were still unhealthy. So that was surprising. I'll have that be my final answer.
Okay. Those were all really great answers, though, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think that to that point, I think most people in America kind of feel like being able to go to the store and buy a Twinkie because they want to, or a Pop-Tart because they want to, it's like, that's their God-given right and they can eat whatever they want. And I think that people don't understand that nutrition literally affects every single cell in our body. That is the fuel for our bodies. And people just believe the government. They think because those are there, they must be healthy. Otherwise, the government wouldn't let them sell them. Mm-hmm. And when people typically start putting down things like that and not eating them, it's always because they want to lose weight. It's never really because people want to get healthy. People typically make their change because they want to lose weight. So what do you think? How do you think we could drive that message home for people that it's not always about the weight? Obviously, you mm-hmm. don't want to be obese because that's unhealthy, but how can we drive that message mm-hmm. home for people to understand that this is about the cells in our body and about being healthy and living a long and healthy life?
It's a hard message because it's such a slow path. Is what I've learned along the way. At some point, you get into the more psychological side of things, right? And you have to become someone's therapist almost to help them make changes. And then you realize why they got this way. And a lot of times it is emotional baggage and abuse from the past. And if you come across Dr. Tro, it's a great doctor, animal-based, the guy. And he's like, yeah, 2/3 to 75% of my patients have abuse in the past. And the obese patients, right? They have some form of abuse in the past, and that's like led them down this way. So that's one side of it, is this psychological side, but it's also the part of making people want to change is somehow making them think long term, right? Because the food it takes, because yes, you can have a Twinkie and you don't keel over. So it's like, how do you convince someone that if you keep eating this way, in 10 years, you're going to keel over, or in 10 years, you're going to have a heart attack? And that's almost the inherent problem with this whole situation, is it's such a slow acting poison that no one will listen to you. If you tell someone that it's dangerous and really bad to eat Doritos and Twinkies and Mountain Dew, they're like, yeah, but I know a guy that does it and he's fine. I'm like, well, let's see this guy. Is he fine? Because no, I don't think he's fine. I have a much different definition of what fine is. Or like, yeah, but I mean, I do it and I'm fine. Everyone wants to make excuses. Everyone wants to eat delicious foods and no one wants to think long-term. So people just have to try it. I guess the proof is in the pudding. Once people try it, they never go back. In a sense, I mean, some people can relapse, and yes, you can kind of go back, but you can't just tell someone that you're going to feel better, even if you've done it yourself and they look at you like, whoa, what happened? You lost like 20 pounds and you look great. And you tell them why, how. They're still not going to do it. You can't convince them that they're going to feel better. So it's a personal experiment, right? People have to learn. You can't force people to do it. Even it's hard to get your family members to change. I never could get my family members to change, but then someone like my sister, just something happened in her life. She found someone else. Actually, what happened is someone else validated my work. Basically, she found this girl that like already was following me and was like, oh yeah, like I do animal based, and yeah, Brian's awesome. And then all of a sudden I became like credible. So yeah, you need I don't know if there's a formula for this, but I guess people just need to try it themselves.
Yeah. The thing that I love that story about your sister. That is hilarious, because that has happened to me multiple times where I tell people about something and then later on they're like, oh yeah, I saw somebody on YouTube that does this or that. And I'm like, it's exactly what I do. I've been telling you that for 2 years. That's exactly what I do. But the hard part for me, now that I've been eating naturally. Now I'm 100% carnivore,
Mhm.
but now that I've been eating this way for so long, the hardest part for me is to see the women. I just turned 50. So the women in the grocery store that are my age or younger than me, very overweight, they can barely walk. Some of them are in scooters, and you look in their carts and you can see that they're trying, right? Their cart is filled with what they think are healthy
Mm.
vegetables, albeit some of them really high in oxalates and things like that. They have strictly lean meats in their cart. They have lots of margarine, lots of sugar-free things. These people are trying. That's
Mhm.
the hardest thing for me, is to see and know that they're unhappy, they're sick, their doctors aren't giving them the right advice, and they don't know how to fix it. So what's your advice for
Mm.
somebody who is trying to do something like this and just
Mm.
doesn't know what to do?
Watch Food Lies. No,
Yeah.
no, we got to finish it. Yeah, it turned into a 6-part series. We're trying to pitch it around to the big platforms like Netflix very soon, like in July, and hopefully be out by the early next year. Again, they have to unlearn everything. There's a big system that they have to go against, and it's super hard because their doctor is telling them the wrong thing. Their government's telling the wrong thing. The USDA is telling the wrong thing. You have to just lead people into the few doctors that get it. And that's the really only thing. I mean, they probably won't listen to me because I don't have a PhD in nutrition or a MD, right? So they're not going to listen to me. But if you find another doctor that there's a few of them, right? There's a few of them out there. They're on YouTube. We know these doctors. People listening probably know these doctors, but you have to point them, be like, hey, there's another side to this. And this person is just as accredited as this person you're listening to, as your doctor, right? This person probably has more experience, really, because guys like, I don't know, Dr. Ken Berry, he's been doing this forever, right? And he has tons and tons of patients that have tons and tons of results. So you have to open people's eyes to that there is actual research out there, and there's actual people with just as much credentials that believe the opposite of the mainstream, and that the mainstream isn't right. Look at the results. Depending on what study you look at, 88 to 92% of the US is metabolically unhealthy. So apparently it's not going well.
Yeah. And it's interesting. This is why it's so hard for people to understand, is because, it's illegal to sell whole milk in schools in the United States, but they can buy a Snickers bar, they can buy a Pop-Tart at the vending machine, they can get low-fat chocolate milk, sugar-filled chocolate milk with their lunches. And so I think that's part of why it is so hard for people to understand. And I was talking to somebody not long ago who had just had like what they call a mini heart attack, and has been following the DASH diet for
Mm-mm.
several years, and just getting sicker and sicker, basically. Lots of lean meats, hardly any oil, mostly fish, really leafy green vegetables. But some of that is wrong. And some of that is making him super inflamed. He's almost unrecognizable. He does not look healthy. And
Mm.
he actually said to me when I was explaining about the carnivore diet, he actually said, I've been going to my doctor. My doctor has given me all of this advice. I have followed everything my doctor has told me, and I'm still so unhealthy. Why would I try something you read about on the internet?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's also a good point if he could zoom out for a second and realize that it's not working, and maybe his doctor's wrong. So many people just can't swallow that pill that their doctor's wrong and that this information's wrong. Yeah, it's hard. There's so many things in society that are backwards, and the more I got into this health world, the more I realized the rest of the world is like this with all aspects of life, where whatever the big institutions, big government, big anything puts down, but their ideas are for them to make either more money or control people easier. Like loosely the word control, you can get conspiratorial and talk about real, they want more control. But I'm just talking about, well, the point of the government is sort of just manage and control people, right? Like keep them in line, make society work. And so anything that's from on high is not for your individual health. It's for the ease of supposedly making society run, and really just making the big businesses that have all the power, make them more money, make everyone more money, but just realize that it's usually at odds with individuals' health, right? What's from the biggest levels is usually the opposite for the very, very smallest thing, which is you.
Yeah, that's true. And it's so hard for people to grasp those kinds of things, I think, because the government wouldn't lie to them, their doctor wouldn't lie to them. I think it's mostly just that in a lot of cases, the doctors don't know, the government doesn't know. This eating this way for some reason seems so far out there. Eating a healthy diet makes you the odd man out, and that's really sad.
Yeah. And I mean, we trace the history. That's why I mentioned a film series. Like if you, once this is out, people will finally realize where all these guidelines came from or why did your doctor learn this? And it's a 70 something year story that this didn't happen overnight. And yes, mistakes were made. Some of it was more evil than just a mistake. You know, some of it was based on profits and was based on what foods we had available. I mean, you think about that 1950s and 60s when all this stuff was happening, when we didn't know why people were getting heart disease and they were guessing and they were like, oh, what if it's fat? You know, there's a whole Ansel Keys story. And then there's this whole story about the USDA and the food pyramid, and that it didn't always have 6 to 11 servings of grains. It actually had far less. And then they're like, wait, we can't pay for all this fresh food. You know, fresh meats and dairy and vegetables cost more. So there's this whole story of, well, they have to pay for that. There's the food stamps program. You know, there's all these government programs that pay for it. So like, oh, well, we have all this corn, wheat, and soy, you know, and let's push this. This is a lot cheaper. And maybe you could say, maybe they didn't know. Maybe they just thought a calorie was a calorie. And they're just like, hey, bread is fine. You know, just it's cheap calories. It's got us through this far. Let's just give them cheap calories to survive, and zoom ahead. And it didn't work. And now we know that a calorie is not a calorie. And humans don't just need calories, right? We need protein and nutrients. This is what we need. I mean, yes, you could technically stay alive on calories, but that's not the goal.
Yeah, and this way of eating has led so many people to be metabolically unhealthy. It has led to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes and all kinds of things. And it's almost as if the government must think there's no going back at this point. So, with as far as being metabolically healthy goes, if somebody makes a change like this, carnivore, sapien, paleo, whatever, if somebody makes like a change for the better, with a heavy meat-based diet, with lots of fatty meats and some, let's say, really good vegetables that are low in oxalates. How does somebody know when they're metabolically healthy? Because I've been carnivore for over 2 years, and I know that I probably could eat some blueberries, let's say, without it being a big deal. But one handful of blueberries for me would lead into 30 handfuls of blueberries. Before I'd know it, I'd eat 2 containers of blueberries. I mean, I haven't tried this theory, but I'm pretty sure that's what would happen. So I don't think that I'm ready to go back, not for metabolic reasons, but for other reasons. For, you know, I had eating disorders and disordered eating for 35 years or something. And so, so for me, I don't think that's possible. And a lot of people come to a diet like yours and like mine and like paleo as kind of a restrictive diet, even though I feel like it is plentiful, but people come to these as a way to restrict people that are abstainers instead of moderators, because that's me. I have to abstain. And so what do you say to people who are trying to figure out if they are metabolically healthy, somebody who wants to try adding things back in? How do you think somebody can check and see if they're metabolically healthy and whether or not that would be safe for them to do?
That's a hard one. Yeah. Metabolic health to me is can you use energy like when you're not eating, right? Like, can you use your own fat when you're not eating and not be hungry? I've heard that. Maybe Mark Sisson, I think he kind of describes it that way too. It's like, if you're not hungry between meals, that's a good sign, right? That means that your body is metabolically healthy enough to tap into your own body fat and use that. And so that could take people a year to do, right? Once they start doing carnivore or something like that, to like shift over and, you know, and not be constantly starving or constantly having like blood sugar, you know, rises and falls and all this type of stuff. But, you know, adding more into your diet. Yeah, I do think that is a good thing to do eventually. I think if you go too long without, you know, having like something like blueberries, there could be some negative consequences. I know some people do it for long times. You know, I'm friends with Dr. Anthony Chafee, and he's just like, I don't know, it works for me. I don't need anything else. I'm doing great. And he looks great and it's great. But there's other people that, yeah, I think they could benefit from that. And we did eat berries every summer or throughout the year. I spent time with these guys. They're eating honey, they're eating berries. They're humans always ate what we came across. And maybe we only had these certain things for a few months a year, right? But it's still a good idea to be able to handle these, and you want to be anti-fragile. You don't want to be feeling terrible if you try one blueberry once. But then I also get the abstaining part, and that a lot of people come from the disordered eating. And so there's not a great answer other than having just certain rules and trying things out and be like, well, yeah, limits on things. Like, it's like, if you only have one carton of blueberries in the house, then hopefully you're not going to go out and get another one. I don't know, that's like this finer detail that it's really hard to know. And it takes experimentation, and I just encourage people to get there, though, because you want to be able to do this for life, and you don't want to just have no limits and no rules, or be so strict that once you have the blueberries, and then all of a sudden you're like going to McDonald's because you've opened the floodgates. So you got to find that way of like, how do I not open the floodgates, but still like expand a little bit? And like, I don't eat like tons and tons of fruits and vegetables and stuff like that. It's like, I do have a very specific set of low oxalate foods, low anti-nutrient foods. I'm not eating like nuts and seeds and leaves. I'm just eating stuff like roots and tubers and fruit, and just like simple foods. And to me, well, I mean, I think I did have sort of a disordered eating thing too, where once I like, if I start eating, I like won't stop. But I found a way to make it work for me, and I have 2 amazing meals, and when I'm full, I stop, and then I don't eat, and then I eat again, and it works. But and it's worked for me to eat blueberries. Like, I just had a whole bunch of blueberries and a pear last night after my dinner, and that filled me up. Like the blueberries and a pear, it's like there's a lot of kind of water in those foods, and it takes up volume in your stomach. That's actually kind of one of the secrets to the sapien diet, I think, is because they are very specific foods that have low anti-nutrients, but it's also it's not just meat, because sometimes people want to have that feeling of stomach fullness, and not that fiber is needed or magical, but just having foods like some berries, they have fiber and water in them. So it is just taking up space in your stomach, if you know what I mean, right? It is a hack. Or eating pickles or sauerkraut is something I do as well. So it's like, I'm getting volume. This is a lot of Dr. Ted Naiman stuff. So he's great, and he's just all about it. And he's on, he's just like, protein, number one. Yeah, protein and fat, it's all good. But humans need a certain volume of food to feel full a lot of the time. And I think it's great to eat with a little bit more variety and feel like pickles. I don't think pickles ever killed anyone. It's just kind of like a bunch of water. And that's just a little hack that helped me just stop eating, right? It's like, there's only so many like pickles and sauerkraut or like a piece of fruit that I can eat, because I'm just full.
Yeah, you mentioned Ansel Keys a little while ago. And so I wanted to touch on that for a minute, because most people don't know why we are so afraid of fat and meat. And I think if I had to pick one person to blame it on, it would be Ansel Keys. And if you guys haven't read Nina Ty Schultz, The Big Fat Surprise, it is an awesome book. I've actually read it 5 times. And every time I read it, I notice something else in it that just gets me fired up and makes me mad. So meat is not bad for us. Fat is not bad for us. And most of the time when people will say, they will cite studies all the time, right? Well, this study says red meat causes cancer, or this study says, that it causes heart disease. And those studies, when they study the meat, it is like a slice of pizza with pepperoni and bacon and sausage on it. It is not the meat by itself. It's a hamburger with a bun, with seed oil based mayonnaise on it. It is not just the meat by itself. There are no studies like that. And I saw somewhere where somebody said that it would be unethical to do a diet where we put people on just meat. And like, I would volunteer. I know a lot of people that would volunteer for that study, but they're not asking people to volunteer. They are basically saying that, I mean, there just is no study like that. So do you think that we will ever get behind this enough that we can encourage or force upon some sort of study that would prove that a meat only or an animal-based diet, let's say an animal-based diet is actually good for you and does not cause any of those things that they say that meat causes?
I would love this. I know a lot of people that kind of are working on this long term. Hopefully it will happen someday. All the nutrition studies are super hard. Big Fat Surprise is an epic book. Yes, please read it, everyone. Ancel Keys. Yeah, it all kind of stems back to him. And yeah, there was a competing guy, John Yudkin, that thought it was sugar and refined grains and stuff. And he lost the argument. Apparently Ancel Keys was a domineering, like forceful guy. And there's a lot to that story that we'll cover in the film. They did one. I know Sean Baker helped kind of rally around the carnivore study, which wasn't it wasn't like a super controlled study. It was kind of like there's a lot of questionnaires and it was great. And Harvard did it and great results, and people resolved so many diseases, and it was awesome. To do like a really long-term study, I don't know if I'm holding my breath for that one. It's so hard to do any food study. I think it could be possible. I think if we find someone with enough money, I think there are people in this space that get it, and maybe we'll fund something, or maybe we can do like a year-long study and I actually have it pretty controlled. And I don't think it's going to be 100% meat-based. I think it would be more like a sapien diet, and hopefully it would be just whole foods and animal-based. And that's possible. Still would take years. It would take years to even get that funded and then approved and all that. Even if we did have the money now, it would be 3 years before it was done and came out. So I don't know. The world doesn't want that. The powers that be don't even want this to exist. I think it's always just gonna have to be people just finding them on their own. And that's the magic of this, is once you do it on your own, then the light bulb goes off and you get it.
So tell us about Food Lies now. Tell us about the documentary. You said it turned into a 6-part series. I can't wait to hear about it, and I cannot wait to watch it.
Yeah, we tell the whole story. We start with how humans evolved and thrived on meat, and why we became human through meat and fat, and why our digestive systems are designed for it, and all the evidence that we were high meat eaters through all of history. And we go into why that all changed in the agricultural revolution. We got shorter, we got smaller brains, more disease, all this stuff that we go on to, we basically cover the entire story, right? We go through the vegan, like the beginning of why did we ever even think meat was bad? Because for all of history, it was our most prized food. And it wasn't until the very late 1800s when this idea even first popped into someone's head. And there's this whole story about Ellen G. White, and then John Harvey Kellogg's involved. And there's this whole story of this vegan movement even getting into the 1950s with Eisenhower's heart attack, into the Ancel Keys, into the food pyramid story, into the bad studies, 1980s, the actual disaster. 1980 is actually when the big uptick in obesity and disease really started. And that's when they introduced the dietary guidelines. So we'll cover all that into all of this, the synthesis sections, I call it, the synthesis of all this information, where we make it really easy for people to understand, like, what is eating. Like, it is about getting protein and nutrients and the right amount of energy, and that how we need to think of food differently, and not as calories, as there's like very different calories in food. There's protein and nutrient calories, and then there's energy calories, right? And that there's most of the processed foods are just pure energy, pure empty calories. And that if we think of food in the sense of like what is natural, what have we eaten for all of history, and kind of just giving some of these kind of mental models, I call them, around food, right? Like how to think about food, like what I'm talking about, protein, nutrients to energy, that type of idea is a mental model. If we give people the tools to understand food, then they will be successful, right? It's like teach someone to fish, don't give them a fish. So we even go into regenerative ag as well. It's like there's a solution here that we can grow food for millions and millions of people with the land we have, if we do things differently. So yeah, that's a recap of the film. It's also super entertaining and fun, and it's not just some weird, boring story about science. We're going to great lengths to make it really interesting. And the intro to the film is on YouTube, and people should watch that because they'll see that we're doing something special.
We will definitely put the link for that down in the show notes. And I think that about wraps it up. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining me tonight and just taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I hope people watch that intro and get excited about this film series.
Absolutely. And thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time here on the Carnivore Revolution.
How did I end up here? Well, it's a long story, but for now, I'll just say I'm Brian, and this is my film. But wait, let's back up a bit. Before Food Lies even began, I didn't just wake up, quit my well-paying engineering job, and decide to make a food documentary. You see, 8 years ago, I got the 2 worst phone calls of my life. First, my mom told me that she'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, which, just a reminder, has no known cure. So just like that, my world shattered. Then a few months later, my dad calls. Turns out he has stage 2 cancer. Once again, shards. I wish I could tell you they beat it, but like most, they didn't. Dad's gone, and mom could go any day now. I went through all 5 stages of grief, but after that came a 6th emotion, fear. To avoid the same fate, I thought I need to live a healthier lifestyle. But then I realized my parents were basically poster children for conventional health advice. They didn't smoke or drink, they exercised, and got 8 hours of sleep. And when it came to diet, they did exactly what Uncle Sam told them. Plenty of heart-healthy whole grains, fresh fruits and veggies, low-fat everything, and of course, they avoided red meat like the plague. Then I thought there must be more to it, so I dug deeper into healthy living. The doctors agreed on most things: avoid tobacco and alcohol, get sleep and exercise. But then I looked into diet, and holy crap. If you think politics is a minefield, nutrition is nuclear. None of the doctors or scientists could agree on anything. As soon as I found an article supporting one diet, I'd find another saying the exact opposite. Low fat, high fat, no meat, all meat, screw that, eat nothing but potatoes. How could the smartest species that's ever lived be so clueless about what to eat? Even bacteria can figure that out. So that's how it started, a 6-year-long exhaustive journey. I interviewed over 200 nutritionists, biologists, archaeologists, and every other ist you can imagine. I even started a top 5 nutrition podcast that's downloaded in over 145 countries. It sucked up every last minute and nickel I had, but it was worth it. Because here's what I figured out. The history of how we got here is insanely complicated, but the answers are pretty darn simple. Lifelong health isn't hidden inside a magic berry from the Amazon. It doesn't come from chugging apple cider vinegar or doing a $500 juice cleanse. You don't need mountains of money, tons of time, or rigid discipline. You just need to know the right information, the truth. And the truth is, they got it wrong. Not just a little wrong, but wrong. Eating the right food is about more than just getting shiny new abs and fitting into your wedding dress. The right nutrition can save your life. We're spending trillions in healthcare treating chronic disease when the best medicine could be right on your plate. Unlike other documentaries you might have seen, I didn't make this because I had an agenda. I made it because I had questions. Like, how did we become a nation plagued by obesity and chronic illness? How do we figure out what to eat when the people in charge don't have a clue? We need to hit every side. The fossil records, anecdotes, genetics, clinical trials. We'll look back at the dawn of humanity and stop at every screw-up, mistake, and milestone that led us here. And even though there's no one diet to rule them all, there's a framework that can guide anyone. There really is a way of eating that's healthy, sustainable, even ethical, and it's precisely the opposite of what you've been told.